Before we dive in, if you love stories where humanity proves it's more than just muscle and firepower, hit that like button, drop a comment with your favorite HFY moment, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this tale. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. Now, let's step into the darkness of Virilia 7. The storm had been rolling in all day, the kind that turns the alien sky the color of a fresh bruise and makes the air hum with static. From the security tower's upper deck, Elias Dern scanned the treeline through a pair of battered optical scopes, his jaw set in a line that spoke more than words ever could. The jungle beyond the colony perimeter looked deceptively still, but Elias had learned long ago that quiet didn't mean safe. Out there, quiet usually meant something was hunting. He had heard the reports: vanished livestock, half-chewed carcasses dragged into the undergrowth, claw marks scored into steel that was supposed to be impervious. The colonists called it the monster. The word was whispered in markets, shouted in council halls, muttered over drinks. Some swore it was a remnant predator from before terraforming, others claimed it was something new, born in the gene warp of Virilia's strange ecosystem. No one agreed on what it looked like, but everyone agreed on one thing: it was getting bolder. The heavy door creaked open behind him, and Jace Rourke stepped out, his rain-slicked jacket glistening under the tower's lights. The younger man was sharp-eyed but still carried that restless energy of someone who hadn't yet learned patience in the field. "They're talking about sending a hunting party," Jace said, brushing water from his hair. "Governor's already getting heat from the settlers. People want this thing gone." Elias didn't look away from the scope. "And what do they think happens when you send a dozen trigger-happy colonists into that jungle?" "They feel safer." "They get killed," Elias corrected, lowering the scope. His gaze drifted to the line of floodlights tracing the colony's perimeter. The farthest ones flickered, struggling against the wind. "Or worse, they wound it. And then it gets angry." Lightning spidered across the sky, illuminating the jagged edge of the jungle for the briefest moment. In that flash, Elias thought he saw movement, low, deliberate, and large enough to make the grass ripple in its wake. Jace caught the shift in Elias's posture. "You see something?" "Maybe." Elias adjusted the focus, but the shadows swallowed whatever had moved. "Thermals?" Jace tapped at his wrist console, then frowned. "Nothing." "Wait, hold on. There's a spike at grid K12. Big one." The rain started in earnest, fat drops hammering the tower roof. Elias slung his rifle over his shoulder and started down the stairs. "Grab your kit. We're going out." The colony gates loomed ahead, flanked by automated sentry turrets that hummed with latent energy. Past them lay the jungle, a wall of tangled foliage, massive trunks, and a mist that clung to the ground like it had weight. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly metallic. They moved in silence, boots sinking into the spongy soil. The deeper they went, the more the colony's lights faded behind them, swallowed by darkness and the dense alien canopy. A faint rustle came from their left. Both men froze, rifles up. The sound was too heavy to be wind, too deliberate to be chance. Elias flicked his wrist and Jace knelt, scanning through night optics. "There," Jace whispered, pointing. A silhouette, huge and hunched, moved between the trees. Its gait was smooth, almost silent, but its size was impossible to ignore. Elias raised his rifle but didn't fire. Through the scope, he caught a glimmer, two eyes reflecting the faintest trace of light, too far apart to be human, too high to belong to anything they knew. The creature paused, head turning slightly as if it knew they were there. It didn't charge. It didn't flee. It simply regarded them for a long, unsettling moment before melting back into the mist, its form dissolving into shadow. Jace exhaled, tension leaking out in a shaky laugh. "That's it, right? That's the monster." Elias didn't answer. His attention was fixed on a tree the creature had passed, a thick trunk with 3 deep claw marks etched into it. He stepped closer, running a gloved finger along the grooves. They were too evenly spaced, too deliberate. This wasn't random aggression. This was a mark. A low, distant sound rolled through the jungle. It wasn't a growl exactly, more a resonant call, deep enough to make the ground vibrate faintly under their feet. Elias had heard predators warn, threaten, or claim territory before, but this was different. This felt like a summons. The rain intensified, drumming against their gear. Jace shifted uneasily. "We should head back before we lose the trail." Elias glanced once more into the direction the creature had gone, the darkness there thick as oil. Something in him, honed by years of war and survival, told him this wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't shown them everything yet. As they turned to leave, a faint crack echoed behind them. Elias spun, rifle raised, But the trilene was empty again. Just the hiss of rain and the distant hum of the colony's floodlights reaching for them through the dark. When they stepped back through the gates, the guard on duty raised an eyebrow. "Find your monster?" Elias shook water from his jacket, his eyes lingering on the jungle beyond. "Not yet. But it found us." Somewhere in that darkness the creature moved again, silent, purposeful, and waiting. The rain had not yet stopped when the governor called Elias into the council chamber. The place smelled faintly of damp stone and old wood, the air thick with tension. 8 council members sat in a semicircle, their faces pale from too many sleepless nights. The governor, a thin man with thinning hair and a permanent squint, leaned forward with his hands clasped. "We can't afford another week of this," he said. "People are refusing to work in the outer farms. Our supply lines are thinning. We need that thing dead." Elias stood with his arms crossed, water still dripping from the brim of his jacket. "You send untrained colonists into that jungle, you're not getting a corpse, you're getting body bags." The governor's voice sharpened. "Then you go. Take a team. End it before someone else dies." The words left no room for negotiation. Elias glanced at Jace, who leaned against the far wall, eyes steady but tight with anticipation. There would be no avoiding this. By nightfall they had assembled a hunting party, 4 security officers with pulse rifles, 2 trackers with scent drones, and Jace bringing the long-range gear. Elias kept his own kit stripped to essentials: rifle, short blade, 2 shock nets, and a compact med pack. The nets were his idea. Something told him they might need them more than explosives. The jungle accepted them with a wet silence. The path was slick, vines hanging low enough to brush against their helmets. Every step was muffled by the thick sponge of alien moss underfoot. Above, branches creaked under the weight of the rain. The light from their lamps cut into the mist in narrow beams, barely enough to see a dozen meters ahead. They moved in formation, the scent drones floating ahead like silent, glowing spheres. One of the trackers, a wiry man named Falco, kept glancing at his wrist display. "It's circling," he murmured. "I think it's watching us." Jace gave a low whistle. "Big brain on the beast, huh?" Elias didn't answer. He'd hunted predators before, both human and otherwise. The smart ones didn't just attack, they waited. Tested. Made you think you were in control until it was too late. They reached a stream swollen with rainwater. The scent drones halted, their lights pulsing as they hovered over something half-submerged at the edge. Falco bent down, pulling it free, a chunk of twisted metal, part of a security drone casing. The edges were sheared, not broken. Clean cuts, as though something with immense strength and precision had taken it apart. "Tell me again how this isn't a nightmare waiting to happen," muttered one of the security officers. The jungle answered for them. A sudden violent crashing came from the left, and in seconds they were surrounded, not by the monster but by a pack of creatures low to the ground, their hides mottled in shades that blended perfectly with the underbrush. Razor wolves. Smaller than the colonists' so-called monster, but faster, hungrier, and armed with rows of serrated teeth. The first one lunged. Elias's rifle barked once, the wolf collapsing mid-leap, but another took its place instantly. The jungle dissolved into chaos, snarls, shouts, weapons fire. Jace dropped to one knee, snapping off clean shots, each bolt dropping another predator. A blur of motion tore through the chaos, massive and black, striking with the weight of a freight hauler. The razor wolf nearest Jace flew sideways, its ribcage shattered by an impact so sudden Jace barely had time to register what had happened. Elias caught his first unobstructed view. It was larger than any of the reports had suggested, sleek, muscular, its hide more like plated armor than fur, catching the dim light in strange, shifting patterns. Its forelimbs ended in claws long enough to slice through alloy, but what froze him wasn't the weaponry, it was the way the creature moved. Every strike was deliberate, controlled, and terrifyingly efficient. The wolves broke under its assault, scattering back into the trees. For a moment, the only sound was the rain hissing against leaves and armor plates. The creature turned its head toward Elias, golden slit-pupil eyes locking on him. No one moved. The others had their rifles trained on it, but Elias lifted a hand, silently signaling them to hold. The creature's chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. Then it turned and began walking, not away from them but deeper into the jungle, each step slow enough that they could follow if they chose. "You've got to be kidding me," Jace said quietly. "It's leading us somewhere." "Maybe," Elias replied, slinging his rifle. "Or maybe it's leading us into a trap." Even so, he started after it. The others hesitated, but the unspoken authority in Elias's tone drew them in behind him. The jungle grew stranger as they followed. Trees twisted into unnatural angles, their roots forming arches overhead, patches of ground that shimmered faintly as though holding pools of liquid light. The air was warmer here, thick with a scent Elias couldn't place, something halfway between ozone and burnt sugar. The creature never looked back, but its pace was steady, almost patient. They reached a wide clearing where the mist pooled thicker than anywhere else. At its center stood a massive hollow tree, its trunk split open to reveal a shadowed interior. From within came a sound that cut straight through the steady rain, a soft, high-pitched cry, repeating at uneven intervals. Jace's rifle twitched upward instinctively. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." Elias moved closer. The creature stepped aside just enough for him to peer inside the hollow. What he saw rooted him to the spot. Two smaller shapes lay curled together, their hides a paler shade than the adult's, trembling with each breath. One had a gash along its side, the other limped weakly when it tried to shift. Their eyes blinked open at the intrusion, bright and liquid, and for the first time Elias felt the word monster falter in his mind. He looked back at the adult. It didn't growl. It didn't block his path. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, a gesture that felt almost like surrender, or trust. The rest of the party shifted nervously, fingers tightening on triggers. Jace's voice was low, uneasy. "Elias, what are we doing?" Elias didn't answer right away. He crouched slowly, eyes never leaving the creatures, and reached for the med pack strapped to his thigh. The jungle was silent now, except for the rain and those faint cries from within the tree. Whatever this was, it was no longer just a hunt. Something else was unfolding here, something that might change everything they thought they knew about the predator in the dark. And Elias intended to see exactly where it led. The cubs were smaller than Elias expected, no larger than a human toddler, but built with the same sleek, predatory lines as the adult. Their limbs were strong, their claws already sharp enough to leave marks in the soft wood of the den's interior. But it was their eyes that held him, rounder than the adult's, unclouded by suspicion, flicking between him and their guardian with something that might have been curiosity. He kept his movements slow. The jungle predators he'd met in his life respected stillness. Sudden motions were for prey. From his med pack, he pulled a slim injector of field anesthetic, meant for injured colonists in shock. The adult watched every move, its breath coming in steady huffs. Elias angled his body so the cubs could see his hands. One tried to shrink away, the other gave a weak growl that was more air than sound. "They're dehydrated," Elias murmured without looking back. Jace shifted behind him, keeping his rifle low but ready. "And you think they're just going to let you fix that?" Elias glanced over his shoulder. "They already are." The cub with the gash was worse off, its breathing shallow. Elias eased closer, placing a pouch of water near its mouth. The cub sniffed, then lapped cautiously, tiny shivers running along its spine. The adult lowered its massive head until its muzzle almost touched Elias's shoulder. The weight of that gaze was as physical as any hand. "I'm not here to hurt them," Elias said softly. He doubted the creature understood the words, but his tone mattered. In his years off-world, he'd learned that tone could bridge gaps language couldn't. The second cub, the limping one, shifted closer to its sibling, pressing against the warmth Elias's body radiated. It surprised him how light its touch felt, almost tentative. He cleaned the wound on the first cub's flank, sealing it with a layer of med gel that hissed faintly as it bonded to the skin. The adult exhaled sharply at the sound, a low rumble building in its chest, but didn't interfere. Behind them, the rest of the hunting party had formed a loose half-circle, guns trained but fingers uncertain on triggers. No one wanted to be the one to fire first. Elias could feel their unease thickening the air. "We should get out of here," one of the officers muttered. "Before it changes its mind." Elias capped the med gel and packed it away. "It hasn't made up its mind yet," he said. Then to the adult, "We're leaving now." He rose slowly. The adult stepped aside enough to give him a path, but its body still blocked most of the den. The cubs whimpered as the space between them and Elias grew. For a moment, he thought the creature would let him go without further contact. But then it moved. It stepped forward, closing the distance between them, until its breath warmed the front of his jacket. Then, with deliberate slowness, it turned and began to walk toward the deeper jungle, pausing only when it realized Elias wasn't following. It looked back, eyes catching the faint light in golden shards. Jace's voice was tense. "Tell me you're not going with it." Elias didn't answer. His instincts had been trained on battlefields where trust was currency, but this felt different. He glanced at the cubs, at the faint steam rising from their wounds in the humid air. Then he followed. The creature led them through a winding path that avoided the densest growth, almost as if it knew where humans could walk without too much effort. They passed under canopies alive with whispering insects and through patches of glowing moss that painted their boots in shifting green light. Once, Elias caught sight of a razor wolf's silhouette in the distance, but it slunk away the moment the adult's gaze turned toward it. They stopped at the edge of a shallow ravine where water pooled at the bottom, clear and cold. The adult descended with fluid precision, then turned back, clearly waiting for Elias to follow. He slid down the slope, boots crunching in the damp grit. Jace stayed above, rifle raised, eyes flicking between Elias and the trees. At the water's edge, the creature crouched, lowering its muzzle to drink. When it finished, it nudged the water toward him, not with force but enough to make the intention obvious. Elias realized what it was doing. He filled a collapsible pouch from his kit and handed it to Jace, who reluctantly passed it to one of the trackers to carry back to the cubs. "You're making deals with it now?" Jace asked, half joking, half wary. Elias didn't look away from the creature. Maybe just keeping the conversation going? The adult studied him for a moment longer, then turned toward the jungle. This time it didn't walk away, it stepped closer, close enough that Elias could see the fine, overlapping layers of its armor-like hide. He could smell it now, a mix of rain-soaked earth and something faintly metallic. It lowered itself until its massive head was level with his chest. The movement was careful, precise, deliberate. Elias understood the invitation before he fully processed it. He reached out, resting his hand lightly on the curve of its neck. The texture was nothing like fur, more like the interlocking plates of an old combat exosuit, warm under his palm. The contact lasted only a few seconds before the creature rose again, breaking it off. Then it stepped back and without warning, a deep, resonant sound rolled from its chest. Not aggressive, not threatening, but something Elias had never heard before. A sound that felt like acknowledgement. He returned to the den with the water, the path somehow shorter on the way back. The cubs drank greedily, their bodies visibly relaxing. The adult stayed just outside the den, watching, not interfering. When the rain began to thin, Elias knew it was time to leave. He stood at the edge of the clearing, feeling the weight of the jungle pressing in. The creature followed them to the treeline but went no further. Back in the colony the air felt wrong, too still, too contained. People stopped to stare as the hunting party returned empty-handed. The governor was waiting, expression unreadable. "No kill?" he asked. "No," Elias said. "And if you're smart you'll stop thinking of it as something that needs killing." The governor's eyes narrowed. "You went out there to end a threat. And you came back with nothing but stories?" Elias held his gaze. "I came back with the truth. That thing out there, it's not hunting us. It's protecting something. And right now, it's more useful as an ally than an enemy." The room went quiet. Even Jace didn't break it. The governor's mouth tightened, but he said nothing more, only gesturing for Elias to go. Later, in the dim quiet of his quarters, Elias sat on the edge of his bunk, listening to the soft patter of rain against the metal roof. Out in the jungle, somewhere beyond the reach of floodlights and fences, the creature was waiting. And whether the colony was ready or not, Elias knew this was only the beginning of their shared story. The colony was tense in the days that followed. Rumors moved faster than the truth. By the end of the week, stories claimed Elias had struck a bargain with the monster, that he was leading it toward the settlement, that the cubs were bait for a larger attack. People avoided his path, eyes flicking away as he passed. Even those who respected him were uneasy. The governor summoned him again, this time in a private chamber with just 2 armed guards at the door. His voice was low, measured, and edged with frustration. "You've been seen near the perimeter twice since your return. I hear you've taken supplies into the jungle. Are you going to tell me why?" Elias didn't sit. "It's not a threat. It hasn't attacked the colony once since we treated the cubs." "That's not reassurance," the governor said. "That's gambling with lives. Whatever it is, it's a predator. You can't make it a friend." Elias leaned forward, his voice like stone. "It already chose not to kill us when it could have. Twice. That means it's capable of choice. And choice means we can work with it. But if you keep pushing for its head, you're going to turn an ally into an enemy." The governor's reply was cut short by the wail of the outer alarms. A deep, bone-shaking thrum rolled through the floor. The guards stiffened. Elias was already moving before the governor could speak. He reached the outer wall within minutes, rain hammering the metal plating, lights glaring into sheets of mist. The watch commander's face was pale under her helmet. "They came from the north, razor wolves? At least 3 dozen. They've breached the first barrier." Through the mist, Elias caught movement, fast shapes low to the ground darting between the trees. Their howls shredded the air, echoing off the walls. A guard on the west tower screamed as one leapt from a branch and pulled him over the edge. Pulse fire lit the night. Elias grabbed a comm unit. All non-combatants to shelter. Every gun to the north wall. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. The wolves were coordinated, more aggressive than before, moving in patterns that suggested something was driving them. From the corner of his vision, the tree line rippled. A massive shape broke through, black armor plates gleaming wet under the lights, golden eyes cutting through the rain. The Tavrixan Prime. The wall guards shouted in panic, rifles swinging toward it. Elias's voice was a whip crack over the comms. Hold your fire. That's not the enemy. The Prime didn't slow. It vaulted a fallen tree, claws digging deep into the mud as it barreled into the nearest pack of wolves. The impact scattered them, one crushed instantly under its weight. It moved like a blade through water, every strike fatal, every motion flowing into the next. Jace appeared at Elias's side, pulse rifle blazing. You told me it could be an ally, he yelled over the noise. Guess we're about to find out if you were right. They fought shoulder to shoulder, Elias picking targets that slipped past the Prime's strikes, Jace covering the flanks. Wolves lunged at the Prime's legs, but its armor plates turned their teeth aside. It shielded its flank with one massive forelimb, almost unconsciously keeping the fight away from the path that led toward the jungle, where Elias knew the cubs must still be. The north gate shuddered as 3 wolves slammed against it in unison. Elias and Jace sprinted to intercept, cutting them down with short, precise bursts. A 4th leapt over the bodies, jaws wide, but a black blur intercepted it mid-air. The Prime landed hard, claws buried in the wolf's ribs. For the first time, Elias saw it falter. One wolf had latched onto the Prime's hind leg, tearing at the joint. Elias didn't think. He closed the distance, his blade punching deep between the wolf's ribs. It fell away, twitching, and the Prime rose again. Its head turned toward Elias, rain dripping from its muzzle. There was no mistaking the recognition in that gaze. The fight dragged into a brutal rhythm. Wolves died in droves, but they kept coming, drawn by some unseen command. Elias realized too late that the largest of them, a massive brute with a jagged scar across its muzzle, had broken off from the main fight. It was angling toward the eastern sector. Toward the shelters. He broke from the line, sprinting through the mud. Jace's voice crackled in his ear, shouting his name, but Elias didn't slow. He cut through side passages between storage blocks, emerging just in time to see the brute closing on the shelter entrance, tearing through a guard who tried to block its path. A roar split the air, not the wolf's but the Prime's. It had followed him, moving faster than something that size had any right to. The brute turned to meet it, and the two collided in a frenzy of claws and teeth. The impact knocked both into the mud, rolling, snapping. Elias fired twice, forcing the brute to shift its head just enough for the Prime to clamp its jaws around the wolf's throat. The kill was sudden and final. The Prime rose, breathing hard, blood mixing with the rain on its armor. For a moment, it stood between Elias and the shelter entrance, scanning for more threats. When none came, it stepped aside. By the time the last wolf fell, the colony's defenses were slick with rain and blood. The surviving guards slumped where they stood, too exhausted to cheer. The Prime lingered at the edge of the wall, golden eyes sweeping over the settlement. The governor arrived, flanked by guards, his expression a careful mask. He looked from the bodies to the Prime, then to Elias. "That thing," he began, but the sentence trailed off. "That thing," Elias said, "just saved this colony." For a long moment no one spoke. The rain softened to a steady drizzle, the mist beginning to lift. The Prime turned toward the jungle. At the treeline, 2 smaller shapes appeared, dry despite the storm, their eyes bright as they waited. The cubs. The Prime paused, looking back at Elias one last time. He stepped forward, closing the distance until they were only a few paces apart. Neither moved for several breaths, the quiet between them holding more weight than any spoken word. Then, with a low, resonant sound, the Prime turned and melted back into the trees, the cubs following close at its heels. Jace came up beside him, helmet under one arm. "You think we'll see it again?" Elias kept his eyes on the darkened treeline. "If we're lucky. And if we deserve it." Later, when the colony gathered to tend their wounded and repair the walls, word spread faster than fear this time. No one called it a monster anymore. No one asked if it should be killed. They just spoke of the black-armored guardian in the rain, and the man who saw the truth before anyone else did. In the quiet hours before dawn, Elias returned to the north wall alone. The jungle loomed silent and watchful. Somewhere out there, the Prime was moving with its young, keeping the shadows safe. He allowed himself the smallest of smiles, knowing that for the first time since landing on Virelia 7, the colony was not alone in its fight to survive. And somewhere beyond the mist, golden eyes blinked once in acknowledgement before vanishing into the dark. The weeks that followed blurred into a fragile calm. The colony repaired its walls, buried its dead, and tried to pretend the night of the Razor Wolves was behind them. But Elias knew better. The Prime had vanished back into the jungle with its cubs, and though its absence left the settlers easier in their minds, the silence of the forest was unnatural. He felt it first on the third week after the attack. A shift in the air. The birds no longer called at dawn. The usual hum of insect life faded at night. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before crossing the treeline. Elias walked the perimeter each evening, and though no tracks marked the mud, he could not shake the feeling that something vast was moving just out of sight. Jace noticed it too. "Feels like the whole planet's holding its breath," he muttered one morning, leaning on his rifle. "Whatever's out there, it's not done with us." They didn't have to wait long. The first attack came from above. A freight drone returning from the mining camp was torn from the sky by something massive, its wreckage falling in a spray of fire across the eastern ridge. By the time the guards arrived, they found no survivors, only huge talon-shaped gouges in the steel. 2 days later, the western hunting party failed to return. A rescue team found only their weapons, scattered across a clearing that stank of ozone and charred flesh. No tracks, no bodies. Just the sense of being watched. The governor called an emergency meeting. The room was tense, voices snapping like frayed wires. Some wanted to seal the gates and wait out whatever hunted them. Others demanded a preemptive strike into the jungle. Elias listened, arms crossed, until the argument turned toward the Prime. "It brought this on us," one man snarled. "The wolves were just the beginning. That thing's presence drew worse predators here." Elias's voice cut through the noise. "You're wrong. This isn't the Prime. Whatever's killing out there, it's not hunting for territory. It's exterminating." The governor's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Elias stepped forward. "The Prime defends its young, its land. These attacks aren't defense, they're systematic. They're clearing us out piece by piece. Which means this is something higher on the chain. Something the Prime won't tolerate either." The room went quiet. For a moment the idea seemed too dangerous to consider. Then the governor spoke. "And you think the Prime would help us?" Elias didn't hesitate. "I think it's our only chance." The plan was madness. Slip into the jungle, track the Prime, and convince it to join them before the unknown predator reached the settlement. Jace volunteered without question. The governor allowed it, but his parting words were heavy. "If you fail, the colony will seal its gates for good. And whatever's out there will finish us." They left at dawn, armed and stripped for speed. The jungle swallowed them quickly, its damp air thick with the musk of unseen animals. Hours passed without sign of the Prime, until Elias spotted the faintest print in the mud, broad, clawed, and fresh. They followed it into the high canopies, where sunlight broke in fractured beams. The trail led to a ridge overlooking a wide basin. Below, the Prime stood over a carcass nearly its own size, something insectoid, armored, and still twitching. Around it, the cubs crouched low, their ears flat. The Prime lifted its head as Elias approached. It didn't roar, didn't charge, just watched him with the stillness of a drawn bow. Elias raised his hands slowly. "We have a problem," he said, voice steady. "And it's your problem too." The Prime's gaze shifted past him into the deeper jungle. Elias followed its line of sight, and froze. A shape moved between the trees, so vast it seemed to bend the forest around it. Its hide shimmered with metallic patterns, shifting like liquid under the dappled light. 6 limbs carried it forward in eerie silence, each ending in talons long enough to pierce steel. Its head was a narrow wedge of bone and black eyes, unblinking, fixed on the Prime. The Prime stepped forward, placing itself between the newcomer and its young. The forest seemed to contract around the two predators, every leaf and branch holding still as they measured each other. Elias's breath caught. He was standing between 2 apex predators, and the smaller one was still large enough to kill him without slowing. The newcomer moved first. It lunged, faster than its size should allow, claws slicing through the air. The Prime met it head-on, the impact shattering branches and throwing both into the mud. The basin erupted in chaos, snapping jaws, tearing claws, the deep, resonant roars of creatures built to dominate. Jace shouted over the noise. "We're not just going to watch, are we?" Elias drew his blade. "We make sure it walks away alive." The fight was brutal. The metallic predator's armor deflected most of the Prime's strikes, but Elias saw the truth: it was after the cubs. Every feint, every retreat angled it closer to them. He and Jace moved to block that path, pulse fire and steel keeping the creature from circling wide. The Prime took a heavy blow to the flank, plates shattering under the force. Blood, black and thick, splattered the ground. But instead of falling back, it surged forward, jaws clamping onto the attacker's neck. The metallic hide sparked under the pressure, the predator thrashing violently. Elias saw the opening. He sprinted forward, driving his blade into the exposed joint at the base of its skull. The creature's scream was a piercing, metallic screech, its limbs spasming. The Prime tore free and together they brought it down, the basin falling silent except for the sound of the Prime's heavy breathing. For a long moment nothing moved. Then the Prime stepped toward Elias. Its golden eyes met his and this time there was no question, it understood what he had done. Slowly, it lowered its head, a gesture that was neither submission nor thanks but something older. A recognition between hunters. The cubs emerged from their hiding place, pressing close to the Prime's legs. It turned and began to melt back into the forest, but paused once, glancing over its shoulder. Elias didn't follow but he felt the weight of that look settle deep in his chest. By the time they returned to the colony, the jungle's oppressive silence had broken. The wind carried the rustle of leaves again, the distant calls of birds returning. Whatever the metallic predator had been, its death had shifted the balance. The governor met them at the gates, eyes scanning for signs of failure. When Elias told him what had happened, there was no argument. No demand for proof. The relief in the man's face was answer enough. That night, as the colony celebrated, Elias stood alone on the wall, watching the dark tree line. Somewhere out there, the Prime and its young moved through the shadows, and for the first time, the alliance between them felt less like survival and more like something permanent. In the distance, far beyond the reach of the colony's lights, golden eyes blinked once in the dark before disappearing into the wild.